Every Planet Wages War. Narrated by Ginger O'Toole. Rosetta made a final adjustment to her scanner as Suzanne and Vex stared through the binoculars. The skylight hung open, reflecting the orange light of dawn. The three were stood on the roof of the cafe. They had about an hour until Suzanne's coworkers showed up. They hoped that this was enough time for them to catch a glimpse at the elusive creature that they had been chasing. The being arrived a few weeks ago, but it hadn't got close enough for Ro to scan it. Its species, its place of origin, and its motives were completely unknown. Suzanne raised her hand as she saw a black dot hurtling towards them, getting closer and closer at an alarming pace. In the distance, a living pyramid about 8 feet tall cut effortlessly through the air, unaffected by the weight of the long chains that hung from its underside. Suzanne likened it to some sort of demonic jellyfish. The pyramid lowered itself, shattering the slates of roofs with the jagged meathook-like barbs that were attached to the end of its chains. The trio dropped to the ground as the creature skimmed the top of the cafe, almost catching Vex with one of its many deadly sickles. Its pungent stench burned the noses of its near victims. Ro jumped up as soon as it was safe to do so and managed to scan the pyramid before it retreated into the clouds. "So, what is it?" implored Suzanne. Rosetta gave her scanner a small shake. Its screen, repurposed from an old mobile phone, began to display text in a language Suzanne didn't recognize. "It's going to be a few hours before we get any useful information," Rosetta reported. Vex stood right at the edge of the building, looking up at the point where the pyramid disappeared. "Did you see its metal claw things?" the boy exclaimed. "Nasty, wasn't it? Still, I reckon I could take it out with a strong enough energy blast. Are we gonna chase it down now or what?" Rosetta packed away her scanner and adjusted her shirt collar. "If you two are planning on pursuing the beast, I'm afraid I won't be able to attend. I got my first day at the IT firm today," explained Ro. Vex turned to Suzanne, but she replied similarly. She'd missed enough days hunting down that pyramid, and she was sure that her boss was getting suspicious. Vex decided instead to spend the day honing his powers, or perhaps looking around for a new job. The room he was living in the B&B wasn't pricey, but his funds were going to run out eventually. They agreed to regroup in the evening and left, climbing back through the skylight and exiting the cafe. Except Suzanne, of course. It only took Suzanne 10 minutes to put on her uniform and turn everything on, so she decided to make herself a coffee and relax in her favorite seat before the workday began. Suzanne's always loved this time in the morning. The darkness had been cast out, and yet the dreamlike peace of the night still remained. She remembered watching the sun rise with one of her old flames back in her traveling days. She found herself reminiscing a lot since she'd become trapped in this parallel universe, especially since she found out that in this world, Shadowwood was non-existent. She'd known this for about 5 weeks now, and it had only gotten slightly easier in that time. She knew that without Shadowwood, there was no way back. In a way, reminiscing was an act of rebellion against her imprisonment. She might be separated from the world she once knew, but she'd cling on to every single memory she had of it. Suzanne was aware that this likely wasn't the best coping mechanism, but she really didn't have any other options. She couldn't talk to Vex about it. After all, he was only a teenager. And Rojetta had plenty of her own problems. The last thing Suzanne wanted was to add to them. There was a light knock on the door. It was Olivia, Suzanne's favorite coworker. She'd changed her hair since Suze had last seen her. It was more of a purple color than its usual red. Suzanne got up from her seat and let the girl in. "Sorry, love. I would have had a coffee ready for you if I knew you were going to show up this early," remarked Suzanne. "I'm sure I'll forgive you if you make me one now," Olivia joked. When the young woman emerged from the back room, she found a latte waiting for her on the counter. "Have you heard the news?" she asked Suzanne. "No. What's happened?" "They've canceled Rift Raiders." Olivia began to elaborate as she readied the till. I know they haven't made any episodes in a while, but it's officially been canceled. We don't know the reason why. Apparently, the guy who ran it all has pissed off to some private island. Lucky for some, I suppose, commented Suzanne. She didn't know that Rift Raiders had been canceled, but she wasn't surprised. After all, she was responsible. Sabotaging their facility had been Ro and Suzanne's first adventure together. She finished her coffee as Olivia continued talking. That Frost Agency thing is trying to cover it all up, but apparently the Rift Raiders were doing loads of shady stuff behind the scenes. I still can't believe that it happened in the first place. Creating a reality TV program where you torture aliens? It's just mad. Anyway, I don't imagine the presenter of the show will be getting any starring roles anytime soon. Suzanne acted oblivious, but she knew the truth. She'd last seen the Rift Raiders presenter, Blake Nolson, in the facility beneath the show's studio. She recalled the crazed look on his eyes as he prepared to kill Rojetta. She supposed that you would have to be some sort of evil to work on something like the Rift Raiders. Of course, Rojetta had worked there too, but it was mainly so she could assist in destroying it from the inside. A goal they accomplished. Sort of. It all went wrong at the last minute, and Blake was likely dead because of that. Not that he didn't deserve it, at least in Suzanne's opinion. They had a long night ahead of them, so Ro, Vex, and Suzanne decided to get something to eat before heading off to find the pyramid. Sat on the rickety plastic chairs of the nearest fish and chip shop, the two women looked on in disbelief as Vex shoveled fistfuls of food into his mouth. "What?" he said, noticing their shock. Suzanne and Vex continued to eat, but Ro just sifted the food around with one of those disposable forks. She wasn't the biggest fan of earth foods. Not even Suzanne's famous beef stroganoff could tempt her. "So how was your first day at the IT firm?" Suze queried. "They gave me a cubicle and left me alone. I was helping with their printers mostly," Rojetta stated, unsatisfied by the task. "I completed all my assignments within the first hour, so I spent the rest of the day decrypting the information we gathered from the pyramid." "Do you know what it is?" "Unfortunately, its biodata doesn't correspond with any species I've ever encountered. But now that I have said biodata, I should be able to locate it using my scanner." Vex had finally stopped scoffing his food by this point. Come on then, he cried enthusiastically. Let's go catch ourselves a monster. You're making it sound like we're in Scooby-Doo, chuckled Suzanne. Scooby what? The look in Vex's eyes showed that he genuinely had no clue what she was talking about. God, I really am in another universe, aren't I? They strolled the slowly darkening streets, the scanner screen pointing the way to the pyramid. So, Vex, did you manage to find a place of employment? Asked Rosetta in a slightly awkward manner. Small talk wasn't her forte. Nah, I went to see if I could get a job back at the auction, but it looks like they've packed up and left. Frost must have scared them off after the raid. Unfortunately, the attitudes displayed by Frost are inherent in a lot of Earth's cultures, informed Ro. They often seek to rule what they do not understand. It's much easier to try to force others into submission rather than to take the time to learn and comprehend. My species is similar. There was one powerful religion that refused to tolerate other beliefs. Over time, you can imagine what they did. My scanner has calculated that the creature should be somewhere within a 100-meter radius. Suzanne looked around but saw nothing unusual. They were stood on the pavement of an ordinary street. A row of red brick houses on either side of the road, illuminated by the streetlights which had only recently been switched on for the night. No sign of any flying alien pyramids. There were, however, 4 men standing at the end of the street. They were stood outside of the light of the lampposts, barely visible under the deep blue evening sky. Suze could just about see that they were all wearing the exact same jackets, almost as if it was their uniform. The jackets had a symbol sewn or possibly painted on the back. She couldn't quite tell, but it was indisputable what that logo was. A crossed-out alien face. That's Earth First's icon on their backs, isn't it? Queried Suzanne. Vex's veins began to glow slightly with energy. Yeah, he scowled. These arseholes really get on my nerves. They're like Frost, but with less brains, less tech, less organization, and more alcohol. Rosetta walked away, trying to avoid confrontation, and Vex walked towards them, his hands curled into fists, looking for the opposite. Suzanne grabbed them both and pulled them back. It wasn't long until they realized why. A dark form slowly descended from the sky, hovering above the men. The Earth's First members shouted incoherently at the pyramid, its chain-like tendrils swaying slightly. Suzanne had met many aliens in the last few years, but never any that were this abnormal. Again, the only thing she could compare it to was a large jellyfish, but even that seemed wrong. A Molotov cocktail was thrown at the being. A volley of flames erupted into its black, leathery skin, but seemed to cause it no pain. The pyramid jolted downwards. Its attacker was engulfed in its chains. The hooks moved rapidly around the man's body, expertly and efficiently dissecting him. Blood and guts spilled out onto the pavement. It lifted up the hollowed-out skin by the eye sockets and pressed the ruined remains into its own flesh, absorbing it to use it as a food source. The 3 remaining men were neither distressed nor surprised by what they had just seen. One of them began mumbling into a walkie-talkie while the others began kicking bloodied body parts into a nearby bush, seemingly unaffected by the gruesome act. All the while, the pyramid hung in the air, watching them without eyes. The man put down his walkie-talkie, and a storm of light whipped up around him. When the winds dissipated, the men and the pyramid were gone. A woman walked up the street, took note of the 3 strange people who stood looking like they had just seen a ghost, and continued on her way, unaware of what had unfolded on the very pavement she stepped on. Rosetta was the first to snap out of the shock. "We need to leave," she stated. "Frost will be on their way to investigate the rift storm. We'll be arrested." "That's what it was, though, wasn't it? It was a rift storm. Somehow they can control the rift," muttered Suzanne. They collectively decided that they'd seen enough for one night and headed back to their respective dwellings. Suzanne and Vex spent a few hours in the communal area of the shoddy B&B they were both staying in. Suzanne made him a hot chocolate and began telling him stories. She told him about her missions with Shadowwood, all the countries she'd visited when she traveled the world, anything to try to take the boy's mind away from the awful event they just witnessed. After a while, they headed off, but just before Vex went into his room, Suzanne said, "You know you don't have to tag along with me and row, right? I know it can be a lot. I can handle it." "Are you sure?" Vex smiled unconvincingly. "Yeah, I'm sure," he replied and closed his door. At 9 p.m. the next day, Suzanne, Rosetta, and Vex stood on the corner of a street outside of a pub. "Are you certain that we've got this right?" inquired Ro. "Yes," insisted Suzanne. "I've spent the whole day figuring this out on the internet. You're not the only one that can use the computer, you know." "Only because I taught you how," interjected Vex. Suzanne was glad that he'd cheered up, although it was obvious that everyone was still a bit shaken. "In half an hour, there's going to be an Earth First meeting in this pub. I went on to Earth First social media, looked through their followers, and found the guy with the walkie-talkie from last night, who, coincidentally, also happens to have accepted the online invitation to this meeting. All we need to do is sit through the meeting, see if we can learn anything about last night. Then when he leaves, we confront Walkie-Talkie Man and get him to fill in all the gaps about what's going on. Got it?" Vex nodded in response to Suzanne's briefing and started making his way into the pub. Ro put her hand on Suzanne's shoulder. "I don't think this is wise," the alien advised. "I told you I spent all day looking it up." "No," Rosetta's voice was quiet yet firm. "Those people are so full of hate. Every time we go near them, Vex and I are in danger. I can process their hatred. I've spent my entire existence doing it, but Vex is but a child. These things, what these people say, it accumulates in your mind. It's no good for him. Ro, I appreciate your concern for him, but he's nearly 18. When I was his age, I was backpacking through Asia by myself. I worry about him too, but he says he can deal with it, and I trust him. I know it was hard for you, and it's not like that for him. This world is messed up. The way most humans treat aliens is sick, but it's how it's always been. He's used to it. I'm aware that it's not nice, but you've got to give him a bit of leverage. Just think, at the end of the night, we'll know how they make those rift storms, and we'll be able to get to my universe. I'll be back home. You'll live in safety. Vex will be able to use his powers for good, just like he wants. It'll pay off, all right?" Ro was still uncomfortable with the idea, but she allowed it to go ahead. It was true that Vex thought that he was capable of dealing with what was going on. Whether he actually could was a completely different matter to Rosetta. When they walked into the pub, it turned out that the meeting had already started. The crowd was mostly made up of older people, desperate to return to their idealized good old days, and disenfranchised younger people. Those were at least some of the reasons, along with simple cruelty and ignorance. An older man, sat on a bar stool, was addressing the 40 or so Earth First members. The trio sat at a table, away from the meeting, and listened in. Vex nudged Suzanne and pointed out Walkie-Talkie Man. He was sat next to the speaker, sporting an array of new scars. "And there's a question that I'm sure is on each of your minds," preached the speaker in between frequent cigarette puffs. "Where the hell has Rift Raiders gone? I'm certain I speak for most of us when I say that it was one of the best things on telly. A bunch of blokes talking about alien scum live on TV. What's not to love? Yes, some hippies complained about it, but they were the minority, and last time I checked, democracy is about serving the majority." To answer both of the questions I raised, and to offer the younger members of our group a very exciting opportunity, it's tonight's special guest, the previous host of Rift Raiders, Blake Nelson! The room burst into applause. Suzanne and Rogetta looked at each other. It was always possible that he could have survived, but the chance was so slim that it was barely worth considering, yet somehow he'd managed to escape the Rift Raiders facility completely unscathed. Blake walked through the pub, signing autographs and shaking hands, his trademark gelled black hair and charming grin on full display. Just before he sat down, he showed off his leather jacket that recently had the Earth First symbol sewed onto the back. That got a great reaction from the audience, because that's where they were. After everything he'd been through and everything he'd done, he was still putting on a show. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've got to say I'm so excited to be here tonight," he announced in the same phony voice that he used on TV. He went on to tell tales about the Rift Raiders, blaming its cancellation on whatever group he thought would get the best response. "Right, new plan," whispered Suzanne. "We're gonna have to follow him. He couldn't have got out of the facility unharmed. Something weird is going on. I reckon it has something to do with the last night and with the pyramid. One problem though, he's bound to recognize us, so we can't get close. At least, not here anyway." Rogetta put a small device on the table. It looked like a drawing pin, but its end was fused to a small antenna. "I was incredibly bored at work, so I created this out of some stationery and a discarded computer mouse. It's very primitive, but it can be used as a tracker, avoiding the danger of getting us too close." Vex stared at her in amazement and confusion. "You're really weird sometimes, you know that?" he teased. "I'll stick it to Blake once he stopped talking. He won't recognize me, so there's no danger. I'd quite like to stab a weird techie drawing pin into him anyway. I always found him annoying on TV." "I'm afraid I'll have to get going soon, ladies and gentlemen," Nelson imparted. "I've had a great time visiting all the Earth First groups in the area, but I must say you lot have been my favorites, and although I may be leaving, that doesn't mean you can't come with me. Oh yes, this is the proposal. Over the last few weeks, I've been running a very successful campaign. Using advanced Rift Raiders technology, I've been sending brave men and women through the rift and across the cosmos to fight off the invaders. Ever since the aliens started living amongst us in disguise, life has felt more and more confusing, more and more meaningless. I want to give you your purpose, your meaning. You can become the next generation of Rift Raiders. So, what do you say? Would you like to travel across the universe and be back in time for breakfast?" Almost immediately, a horde of young men readied themselves to fight Blake's crusade. They made no discussion about it, but simply silently rose from their seats as if by command. Vex grabbed the tracker and went to carry out his mission. "Come straight back once the device is planted," demanded Rogetta. When he got close enough to the man, Vex pretended to fall over. As he impacted the ground, he stabbed the tracker into the side of Blake's shoe. As much as he'd have enjoyed causing Blake pain, the shoe seemed like the most sensible place to attach the device. Nelson helped Vex to his feet, that television smile unremovable from his face. "You all right, kiddo?" Something about Blake's eyes made the hair on the back of Vex's neck stand up. It was as if some unseen force was exiting through his eyes and trying to crawl into Vex's head. The boy dismissed it. He was tired, after all. It could have just been his mind playing tricks on him. "Yeah, just tripped. I'll live," Vex answered briefly. Blake's game was obvious, using his celebrity status to amplify the crowd's hate-filled beliefs, converting them into soldiers. Why he was doing that, though? Vex had no clue. He had seen the terror that both the Rift Raiders and the Earth First had caused, but he was always powerless against it. Until now. It was then when he decided that he was going to shut down Blake's operation himself. Suzanne and Rosetta watched from their table. "Why is he conversing with Blake?" snapped Ro. "Just give him a second. He's planted the tracker. He's probably just talking his way out of it." Nolson gave one final wave to his audience and walked out. A band of young fighters, including Vex, followed behind him. "I told him to come straight back. What does he think he's doing?" Rosetta hissed. "He's trying to show us that he can handle it himself," declared Suzanne. "You were right, Ro. I should be keeping a closer eye on him. Let's get him out of there before he gets himself hurt. Blake will recognize us. There's a very high possibility that he'll report us to Frost, leading to—" Suzanne cut through Rojetta's rushed words. "He's our responsibility. That's what you've been saying from the start, but I ignored you. I recognize that, and I'm sorry. Whatever happens to him now, it's my fault. Blake will realize that it's us. We're not going to be able to get out of this one by talking or running. I understand if you want to stay here, but I have to go." Suzanne threw on her coat, checked for her gun, and left. After a moment of consideration, Rosetta joined her. Suzanne was at the wheel of Rojetta's car, finally being allowed to drive it. The vehicle tried its best to keep up with the driver's reckless demands as they tore into the outskirts of town. Following the signal from Ro's tracker, night had truly set in as they swerved into the industrial estate. The rows upon rows of identical warehouses were a familiar sight for both Ro and Suzanne. They neared in on the now stationary signal. She slowed the car down as to not arouse suspicion. They parked in the shadow of one of the buildings and watched as half a dozen of young men filed into a silver minibus. It looked like they were the final recruits for Blake's army. Suzanne wasn't sure how long the people had been waiting there for the bus, but was concerned when she realized what they were waiting next to. A large sign displaying the words, "Rift Raiders Studio B." "What do you reckon they're using this studio for, Ro?" "Maybe it's their base. Maybe that's where they keep whatever they use to make those rift storms." "No," contradicted Rosetta, staring out the car window. "I doubt that he's using it at all. Studio B is primarily used as storage. Blake wouldn't know the entry code. Then why have those people wait at the studio? It's a tactic. They're more likely to assist Blake if he associates his cause with the Rift Raiders." "Nasty," Suzanne remarked as she loaded her pistol. "I'll fight off Blake and the Earth First goons. You just make sure that Vex gets out of there safe. Try to avoid killing." "Ro, you don't need to keep reminding me," she snapped. The two approached the minibus. Suzanne's gun was behind her back for now. The bus's engine started up but was quickly killed. The passenger side door swung open and Blake Nolson stepped out onto the road. He was dwarfed by a lorry that had been left for the night at the side of the road, yet he walked with a gait that suggested that he was in complete control. "Suzanne! Lovely to see you again," he proclaimed, having swapped his overacted TV tone of voice for his authentic one. "And Ro... Shredder, was it?" "Jetta, you worked alongside me for 7 years," asserted Ro. "In case you didn't notice, darling, I was the star of the show. I wasn't paid to learn the names of the little people." The show got canceled, Blake. You're not a star anymore, Suzanne stated bluntly. That pyramid monster that killed an Earth First member last night. What have you got to do with it? Usually I wouldn't respond so well to this sort of treatment, but since I've got nothing to hide, I will explain. Those pyramids, that's what we're fighting against. There are loads of them all across the universe. I send willing volunteers through the rift to help them kill them off. Stop them from getting to Earth. The ones that come back as heroes. They've helped save their planet. What more could you want? That particular pyramid you mentioned managed to slip through a rift storm. We've been trying to take it out, no thanks to you. So that's it? Questioned Suzanne, taken aback. That's it. It's dangerous, but they know what they're getting into. That's the sort of operation that Frost would run, not you and a group of civilians. There has to be something more to this, I'm certain. Perhaps he is somehow draining the life force of those he sends through the rift. That would explain why he is still alive, Rosetta expressed. Suzanne took her pistol from behind her back and pointed it at the man. So, what's the truth? Oh, bloody hell, spluttered Blake. Boys, we've got a bit of trouble here. A regiment of men jumped out of the minibus, all of them holding weapons and wearing the Earth First uniform. All except Vex. What are you doing here? The boy called out. You can't do this alone, Vex, cried Suzanne. Oh, well, this is a development. Grab him! Blake gleamed with animalistic delight as he shouted his command. The young men turned on Vex, throwing him to the pavement and holding him there. Vex struggled, trying to draw on a local power source, but there was none. Without somewhere to channel energy from, Vex's abilities were useless. The men acted without question, completely under Blake's influence, almost as if they had no will of their own. Something wasn't right. Let him go! Suzanne shrieked, firing at Nolson. One of the fighters mindlessly flung himself in front of Blake, taking the bullet into his leg. Despite the blood soaking through his jeans, the man simply got back up and ran at Suzanne. His baseball bat slammed into the side of her head. Suzanne fell to the floor, now hanging on the edge of consciousness. Rosetta snatched the gun from the ground and directed it at Blake's head. Oh, come on, he cackled. You gave me a hell of a punch back at the facility, but I know you don't have it in you to kill. I might not remember your name, but I remember the way you looked at the way we treated those aliens at Rift Raiders. Like you were so much better than it. Like you were above the rest of us. You're just a coward, that's all. We'll give the boy back eventually. Until then, stay out of my way. Vex was dragged into the back of the bus. Blake smirked and proceeded to hop back into the passenger seat. The minibus pulled away and drove off into the dark. Rosetta trembled. Her hand surrendered the pistol. The feeling of failure slammed into the woman's stomach alongside the icy night air. Suzanne, I'm so sorry, she uttered. Suzanne pulled herself up, a prominent bruise now forming on her face. We both let him down. We can't afford to do it again, she established. If they find out that he's half alien, God knows what they'll do to him. You said that Studio B was used for storage. Did they keep any weapons in there? Yes, but only non-lethal. That's fine. I don't want to have to kill anyone at the best of times, but those men, I don't know if I'm being crazy, but I really don't think that they had minds of their own. Anyway, I'm going to go and see what stuff is lying about in the studio. You should do some computer magic. Find out where they're taking Vex, hack into the security and all that stuff. We can't get it wrong this time. This is our last chance. Despite her use of casual vocabulary, Suzanne was deadly serious. Vex only caught a quick glimpse of the building he was currently in, but he saw that it was one of the large contemporary-style mansions that overlooked Guilford, the gray-type ones that mainly consist of large windows. Vex and his mates used to egg these places every Halloween. He supposed that now he might not get to see another Halloween. Some of Blake's zombies had tied him to a metal chair and left him in a pitch-black room. The invisible force that crept from Blake's eyes was stronger here. Much stronger. After a few hours of screaming and thrashing around, the opening of a door allowed some light in. Not enough to completely illuminate the room, but Vex was sure that he saw something else in there with him. A device, perhaps? One that granted Blake control over his army? The room was plunged back into darkness as Blake walked in and the door closed. "There's no point trying to get out," informed Blake. "I had this room specially made so it's completely soundproofed. In here, no one can hear you scream, and you wouldn't be able to hear anyone reply. From now on, you will be spending every day in gloom. The only thing you'll have to talk to are my surveillance microphones. There is one way out, though. I have some friends in the Frost Agency that are interested in you and the company you keep. Tell me everything about your little gang, and I'll let you go." Vex spat in the general direction of the voice. A horrible splatting sound confirmed that he had made contact. "Charming. Still, if you won't answer to me, then you might answer to my boss." "Your boss?" questioned Vex. "Oh yes. I never go freelance. Too unpredictable. Anyway, did you think I created those rift storms? Did you think I somehow developed the power to convert people into little more than zombies? No. No one on Earth has that power. Luckily, my boss isn't exactly from around these parts." The ceiling revealed itself to be one single panel that washed the room in harsh white rays of light. The rest of the room was made up of featureless concrete walls. Vex strained and scratched at his binds when he realized what he was facing. He was wrong about the thing he briefly saw in the room with him. It was no artificial device. It was a living being. The creature was a large, pulsating mound of inky flesh. Its form was constantly shifting, never maintaining one solid shape. It had many mouths lined with teeth, blunt from millennia of consumption. Its almost humanoid eyes peered out from under sags of heavy skin. Despite its bestial appearance, Vex could tell the thing held vast sums of sinister knowledge. Wires snaked out from the alien, leading to some sort of life support machine. "What the hell?" the boy screamed. "Handsome, isn't it?" Blake joked, reveling in Vex's fear. "Unfortunately, it can't just mind control you into telling us everything you know. It works by manipulating deeply rooted beliefs, stimulating those beliefs to the point where it consumes someone completely and they submit to its will. It plucked me from the pits of the Rift Raiders facility, used me as the stimulus to control Earth first, to turn them into its army. And you gave in like that? You just became his servant? You're pathetic," shouted Vex, imbued both with rage and terror. "A job's a job, kiddo. You don't understand that yet. Sometimes you just have to do what's necessary to survive, including sending people to their deaths. Granted, Earth First are world-class dickheads, but this plan is just evil. What does that thing even need an army for anyway? What does anyone need an army for? To fight a war. Those pyramid things, they're all across the universe, and no one is too pleased to have them around. My boss here goes from world to world, collecting soldiers to fight them, or die trying. They're not soldiers, though, are they? They don't get a choice. It's sick. It's what will happen to you if you don't tell me everything right now," Blake yelled. "In 1 second, it could rift storm you into the heart of battle. Not exactly a great place for a child to be unsupervised. So be a good boy. Tell me everything." No. Vex's confidence was fading, but he wouldn't give up his friends that easily. Blake mentioned to his master. The creature began to heave violently as a rift storm stirred beneath Vex's chair. The boy's attention was drawn away from the threat when he noticed that the dials on the monster's life support machine had started moving on their own. Or, more likely, were being remotely controlled by a certain technically skilled alien. The life support emitted a piercing alarm as the beast began to squirm in pain, no longer able to generate the rift storm. Blake ran over to the machine and began flicking switches, hoping to amend whatever fault had occurred. With his back turned, Nolson didn't realize the door opening and the woman stepping into the room. Nor did he realize the blue bolt of energy that was hurtling straight at him. Blake dropped to the floor, and Suzanne stood above him, stun gun in hand. The woman cut Vex free and checked that he was all right. "I'm so sorry, Vex. This will never happen again," she assured. "Rogetta is outside, waiting for you in the car. I've used a more powerful stun on Blake's army. Just run straight out of the house and into the car." It was clear that Vex was keen for a fight, but the look on Suzanne's face told him that she wasn't willing to negotiate. The boy straightened his jacket and dashed out of the room. Suzanne placed herself on the metal chair and drew her pistol from her coat, waiting for Blake to wake up. The alien life form had begun to calm slightly, adjusting to the alteration in its support machine. It had just enough power to stay alive and maintain its psychic hold over Earth first, but nowhere near the amount needed to create rift storms. Blake's eyes fluttered open. He looked up into the barrel of Suzanne's pistol. "What the hell do you want now?" he murmured. "That thing you're working for can send people through the rift. I have a particular destination I need to get to. Vex and Row too. Get it to talk with us or I'll shoot. You know I will. You've used up all your chances. And why do you think it would listen to you? The second you give it its power back, it could send you into a black hole. I've got backup," revealed Suzanne. "The boy in the brain?" Blake roared. "I've beaten you all before. Why would this time be any different?" "Because there's a massive flaw in your plan. You've set up security microphones all around this mansion, and Rogetta's been listening in. The mind control of your army works by exploiting their deeply held belief, hating aliens. I'm sure they'd be pretty angry if they'd found out they'd been working for an alien this whole time. I don't think they'd be susceptible to suggestion after finding that out. They were violent already, so imagine all that violence doubled up and directed at you and that creature." "That's my backup," Suzanne declared. Blake had been reduced to his truest self, all the TV confidence stripped away. "I can't," he pleaded. "I can't talk to it. I don't know. I just sort of feel what it wants me to do, and I do it. I can't talk back to it. I just can't." Wrong answer. I've been stuck in this world for too long, trying to keep myself together, trying to keep everyone else safe. It's too much. You better think of something quickly, Blake. Okay. There's an old Rift monitor in the basement. I salvaged it from the Rift Raiders facility. Maybe you could use that. Use it to find an opening back to your world. Just let me live. Let me carry on my operation here. My boss is only taking Earth First members anyway. Why would you care about them dying? It's not just them, though, is it? Who knows how many people that rogue pyramid might have killed? As long as this whole thing is going on, innocents are in danger. I'll take your Rift monitor, but you better pack up now. That's not possible, begged Blake. The only purpose of the alien is to recruit soldiers from lesser species. Whilst it's here, it won't stop taking soldiers. You can't bargain with it. You can't reason with it. It's a living computer. Really, that's all it is. Suzanne contemplated what the man said and replied by emptying her gun onto the extraterrestrial. Shot after shot, the beast recoiled and reacted, letting out an indescribable screech. The being somehow drew the energy to create another rift storm. The storm was turbulent. The winds tossed Suzanne into a wall, causing her to accidentally shoot Blake in the shoulder. As the creature began to disappear, Blake was drawn into the tempest with it. He tried to scrape at the floor, hoping to grab onto something, anything, but he was powerless. Both he and the monster were gone. Suzanne placed her head on the wall and exhaled deeply. She'd lost another chance at getting home. She'd spent a lot of time in the parallel world now, but she never tried to actively kill something until this point. That had to mean something. She knew she had a lot of explaining to do to Rojetta, but mostly to Vex. Now that they had access to a rift monitor, Suzanne reckoned that they could set up a base of their own, somewhere where Vex could practice his powers in peace, whilst she and Ro kept a lookout for openings in the rift. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a step in the right direction. Until then, like always, they had a lot of work to do. Everything was about to change.